Okay, good morning. Good morning. My name's David Patterson. I teach Holocaust Studies and Anti-Semitism Studies at the University of Texas in Dallas. I'm also a Senior Research Fellow with ISGAP, and I've had the honor to learn with people, the scholars in ISGAP, learn from them. And I look forward to learning with and learning from everyone who is here today. Beginning with Naya Lekht. Naya is a specialist, is a curriculum specialist. She's based in New York, where she works with high schools in the area of anti-Semitism, which is a big challenge, huge challenge. And Naya, I know Naya, I've heard Naya. She is extremely knowledgeable authority on this topic, and so please welcome Naya Lekht.
Thank you. Thank you all. So we are going to kind of really switch gears here and not talk about anti-Semitism at all. We're going to talk about curriculum development. And so a little bit, I'll just preface this and say, you've heard me say that I switched from higher education into high school for various reasons, one of which is because it was very difficult to teach the Arab-Israeli conflict the way that I teach the Arab-Israeli conflict in university, as well as the history of anti-Semitism. And I spoke about this last week in my lecture. So I've kind of pivoted to work with high school students, and like I said before, mostly I work with the Jewish population. Okay, so today we're going to devote a couple, maybe 30, 40 minutes I'll speak, and then I want to use that time for discussion for your own development of your curriculum. I'm going to ask this again. How many of you are currently teaching the history of anti-Semitism? Okay. And I'm going to ask again, does that mean the Holocaust for you guys when you say the history of anti-Semitism? Or
yes.
Yes. It's part of it. Part of the history. All right. And how many of you are going to come back to your house university, home university institutions and hope to teach a class? Okay. Okay, and I want to recognize the challenge of many of you've spoken with me privately, and you've also shared that it's difficult to teach, especially the lecture that I gave last week on anti-Semitism. Some of you had said it's virtually almost impossible to do it this way in university. So that's something we need to also discuss, how to teach without giving up on principles of truth, this topic. All right, so I'm gonna kind of look back and forward at you guys all and ask some questions. All right, so this is pedagogy and curriculum mapping. What do you guys think when I say curriculum mapping? What do you guys think when I say curriculum mapping? What do you think it means? Je ne sais pas. Yeah, it's very how to map a curriculum. Yeah, but tell me more. Creating structure, okay, for the course, yeah. Okay, very good, excellent. We're going to look at diagrams. Okay, yeah, you were going to say something? A timeline of the course, that's wonderful. So seeing yourself as moving with your students through time, very nice, yes? Okay, so assessments, so that's another thing. How are you going to assess what your learning objectives and outcomes have been met? All right, very good, this is all great. Okay, look at that. We're starting with a little bit of a diagram. Now, usually when we talk about curriculum mapping, we talk about people talk about it in stages, 5 steps, 6 steps, sometimes it's 10 steps. By the way, I'm more than happy to share this PowerPoint with everyone. So it begins with general needs, right? Then it goes to learner needs. And that's something I really want to stress, is when you are developing a curriculum, who is in your room? You have to again, you don't give up principles of truth, but you also have to understand who is in your room. So I'm speaking to you all right now. So in my room, there are scholars. In my room, there are policymakers. So I'm kind of tailoring it to you guys right now, okay? Goals, objectives, we're gonna talk about. So this kind of, it's moving through time, exactly. All right. For me today, when I talk about curriculum mapping, I talk about learning objectives, learning outcomes, those are different, and we're gonna discuss the two. Guiding questions, I always begin with like, what are these seminal, critical questions that are anchoring your curriculum? And methods and approaches, how are you gonna get there? That's the methodology, basically. Okay, I love Benjamin Franklin. So there's a wonderful quote by him, I'm gonna read it out loud. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. Talk to me about that. How do you understand that? What does teach, tell, involve? What is the difference between teaching, telling, and involving? Yes. Bonnie.
If I just talk to my students and lecture to them, they very quickly start to drift away. They're not absorbing it. But if I get them involved to hear about their experiences, their perception of what we're talking about, then it becomes a learning experience for them and for me as well.
Very good. Right. So the traditional kind of lecture mode of teaching, we're all accustomed to it. I don't know if it's more prevalent in the European model, American model, but I remember myself undergrad, you know, the professor would stand at the lectern and almost read the paper out loud. You're not gonna involve your students that way. I'm just gonna be very, very blunt. They're just gonna, especially in this digital age that we're in, it's not gonna work. But then the question is, how do you involve? So there's different methods for, as you say, involving, hearing from them, making them be more active participants in your classroom, okay? And there are different methods for that as well. So this is how I'm breaking it. What do you want to tell? What do you want to teach? How do you want to involve? You could think about it as those three stages of your curriculum. What is it that you want to teach? Okay, I want to teach the history of anti-Semitism. What do you want to tell? What's the difference between teaching and telling, do you think?
Telling is a one-way and a delivery of information versus teaching can be two-way.
Okay, I see it the opposite, but you're absolutely right. It's basically versus one way versus two way. And what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think maybe using more examples and trying like to use persuasive means rather than just sharing the story.
Okay, story. So last week we heard from David Harris's wife. We heard a personal story. And some of you may think, okay, that's interesting. I heard a story of a Jewish refugee from Arab lands. You know, they're known sometimes as the forgotten refugees, about 850,000 of them that were kicked out because of Israel and Zionism. How are you gonna, so this is a story. How are you gonna use it? Are you gonna use it in your curriculum? Do you use personal stories in your curriculum? First of all, if you're teaching Holocaust, of course, there's a plethora of, testimonies, firsthand accounts, narratives. Stories are really great vehicles for transmitting stories about the Holocaust. Teaching is more fact, like not giving up on the truth of those facts, okay? And then involving, all right. So I've kind of referenced this before, but when I build either a syllabus or a curriculum, I employ something known as the backward design method. How many of you are familiar with that? Okay, so backward design is exactly what it means. You build going backwards. That means you need to know how the story ends. So if you're a writer, you're writing your novel or your short story, you kind of know how the story ends and you work your way backwards. How will your story, if we envision your curriculum as the story that you're telling about the Jewish people and the history of anti-Semitism, where does it end? Where is your final class going to be? What are the final things that you want them to come out? Like they just finished your class. I don't know what system you're on. Some people are in quarter system, 10 weeks. Some people are in semester systems. So it's the end. They walk out, and somebody asks them, Dr. Amon, you just took a class with Dr. Lekht on the history of anti-Semitism. What did you learn? If your student can't give a one sentence, it's not good. That doesn't mean that it's not complex and nuanced, but they need to be able to articulate. What did they learn in that class? What did they do for that entire semester? Like, I hate to say it in marketing language, but like the elevator pitch, if you will, of pedagogy. Okay? So in developing a backward design method, there are 3 stages, at least that I've identified. What do you want the students to achieve through desired results? How will you measure those results? That's important. We talked about assessments. So, okay, I'm just gonna use a little bit of pedagogy lingo, formative and informative assessment. Do you all know what that means? So so when we teach, we're a good teacher, cares very deeply what their students have learned. And this teacher, if it's a very good teacher, is constantly doing assessments in the form of questions. Questions that for recall from what did we do last week or yesterday. Then there are formative assessments, tests, quizzes, essays, right? Those are formal assessments of like, okay, I know they learned this because I gave them a test and they scored this. So when you are creating your course, you also have to think, how are you going to be assessing this knowledge that you're transmitting? Any questions so far with this? No? Okay. And then you identify desired results. So for me, well, I'm not going to say, we're going to practice. I have a few examples of lessons, and I'm going to ask you to look at these lessons and then tell me, what do you think were the desired outcomes of those lessons? And by the way, sometimes you don't achieve them. You know, teaching is a lab. I always think of teaching as a laboratory, and it's experimental, and you have to take pedagogical risks. And sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. But from when it doesn't work out, it actually makes you think. Like, if you remember from my last week's talk, I initially began teaching the history of anti-Semitism with the IRA definition and the 3 Ds. And I thought that that would have been enough for my students to then be able to identify evolving forms, how it evolves, how anti-Semitism evolves in its manifestations. And they didn't. And I remember I was very frustrated. I remember I called my mom and I thought, sorry, I'm gonna use that, we're all screwed. I was like, they're not getting it, they're not understanding. And so it forced me to have to rethink of a way to connote or relay the information in a way that would actually get them to understand. So sometimes the failure is not really a failure, but what I'm trying to stress is when you teach, sometimes it's going to happen that those learning objectives are not met, but then you have to ask why. Why are those learning objectives not met? Okay, we're going to practice a little bit together. So for instance, so my dissertation actually was on the Holocaust. Yes?
Do you want to wait with questions and answers and keep going, or do you take a question? It's up to you.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Could you just clarify learning objectives and learning outcomes?
We're going there.
We're going to go there?
We're going to go there, yes. So my own dissertation was on the Holocaust, but in the Soviet context. And my topic was Babi Yar. And remember, we heard from Professor Don Michman that he does not like the term Holocaust by bullets that was developed by Father Patrick Dubois. So I taught a class on the history of the Holocaust, but it was really focused on the Soviet experience of the about 2 million Jews who had perished, who'd been murdered by bullets in pits and ravines and forests. So I worked backwards, and I said to myself, students will know about, they will need to know the term. They will need to know the term Holocaust by bullets. I needed them to know that term, and I wanted them to know about Babi Yar. So we spent a lot of time talking about Babi Yar as a place, and Babi Yar as a place of memory, collective memory. By the way, sorry, it's just something that I'm very passionate about, Babi Yar. How many monuments do you think are at Babi Yar today? When you think about Holocaust and collective memory.
I think there is one, it's been damaged in a Russian strike a couple of years ago.
Okay, but I mean in general, on the Babi Yar property, how many, no, that's not true. There are over 11. And the way I understand that is, it's kind of like vying for memory. To whom does this memory belong? The first actual official monument was erected in 1976 by the Soviets, but the Soviets, of course, universalized and said, here lie peaceful Soviet citizens, thereby erasing the identity of the victims. Sorry, I just get passionate about this topic. But so I wanted them to really understand the term Holocaust by bullets, the genesis of that term, where it comes from. I wanted them to know about Babi Yar, both the history and then how it has been used in collective memory. And then I wanted them to be able to place the story of Babi Yar and the Holocaust within the larger story of how we conceptualize the Holocaust, which in many ways has been overshadowed by Auschwitz and concentration camps. So how I wanted them to become very well versed to be able to talk about it and understand it. Okay. The formative assessments that I used, remember, is presentations, essays, journals. Oh, by the way, journals are great for students. I had them do field work because this was in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, at that time, there was still a Jewish community. They were meeting these veterans. They were Jewish veterans of the Second World War who fought in the Red Army. And I had them meet, I translated, but I had them meet these, I guess, I don't know if they're, I don't think they're survivors, but people who were part of the war. Okay, so that was kind of how I built that class a bit. I also would like to give you another framework for how you think about yourself as a teacher, as a guide. How many of you, you're here in Oxford. How many of you have gone on a walking tour right? Yeah, what's the difference between a good tour guide and a bad tour guide? What does that mean?
If I'm engaged and I ask you questions, I may blame the tour guide, but if I'm not engaged, then I'm not going to be the best. I'm the difference between a good and a great tour guide.
Okay, so the engagement of the person. But I'm asking about the tour guide. What is he doing to engage you? What is he or she doing to engage you?
He has to talk about the place which we are in. His talk has to be relevant to the place, not many like backstories and side stories. He must not talk for too long, because then people get tired. So it has to be focused and it has to be place relevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would think that the tour guide example, like scaffolded experience, is pretty important, and also awareness of the audience, preparation for it. We're about to approach this space. Here's why it's significant, as well as like literally reading the crowd and their ability to continue walking or to engage in certain stories.
That's excellent. And you took my example. So there are tour guides who walk, and they go, and to our right is the Baudelaire Library, versus while we're walking. And as we are walking, I want you to understand that we're about to approach, this is scaffolding. This tour guide is getting you prepared for that moment that you are going to engage with that signpost or that landscape. So if you think of your curriculum, week, let's say 4 is going to be devoted to anti-Judaism and Martin Luther and St. Augustine and the Christian, let's say, tradition of anti-Semitism. You have to think about week 3. What is happening in week 3 to prepare you for week 4? Yes, Bonnie?
I would think that there's a similarity between a good teacher and a good tour guide, and that's passion. They have to have passion for what they're teaching.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Passion. That's true. All right. Okay, I'm going to just show you a few kind of models from the 1970s, a little dated, and then a little bit more modern for how to develop curriculum. Okay? So we have the ADDIE model, which stands for Analysis, Design, Develop, Implement, Evaluate. Remember, we talked about stages of a curriculum and moving through time. This is basically another way to conceptualize creating your curriculum or creating your syllabus. Okay? So, analysis. You identify, again, it starts with, it always starts with identifying the learning outcomes. We're going to talk about the difference, learning outcomes and learning goals, but also your students. Remember, I can't stress this enough, how important it is to know who's in your room and how are they going to receive that information. Okay? So for instance, I have a question for you all. So you all are going to teach about anti-Semitism. Does anybody want to share a learning goal? Just an objective? Like, what would you want your students to know? Yeah.
As an example, in my case, it would be directed towards the young Assyrians who are growing up and being indoctrinated within the American education system, reminding them of their connection, the Jewish connection and the Assyrian connection we had in the Middle East, and how their parents and grandparents were closely connected versus the indoctrination that is going on and the hatred that is being developed.
Okay. So it's interesting, I asked you, so if I may, I asked you, what are your learning objectives, but you went to talk about your students first. You said, my students, you work with a Syrian Christian population mostly, and you wanted them to know about the Assyrian Jewish or Christian Jewish connection. Okay, but how does that teach them about anti-Semitism? So, but why, but how
So it would basically be to remembering and understanding the past relationships in order for the anti-Semitism to break. So the objective is to break the anti-Semitic sentiments within them, but by taking them back to the past and how it used to be.
okay, I'm not so it's interesting. So in your community, there are kind of entrenched views that are anti-Semitic, you would say?
The students that are growing up and going to colleges, they're being indoctrinated.
I see.
And therefore there's a clash in the households between parents, and it's not just this issue, and it's not just the Assyrian community. The Coptics are going through this. The Maronites are going through this, where the older generation, the younger generation are clashing on several issues, and especially on anti-Semitism.
Wow, very interesting. Okay, great, yeah.
I would want my students to understand how pervasive anti-Semitism is across time and space, and that the Holocaust is not the beginning and end of anti-Semitism.
So that's great. She just identified a really great learning objective, how pervasive it is, how not just global, but how much it moves across ideas and time. And she doesn't want her students to think that anti-Semitism is only located in the Holocaust. And yeah.
I want my students to understand anti-Semitism basically like a scam. It's like we are taught how to avoid scams, which may distort our perception of reality and force us to do things that we wouldn't do otherwise. I want them to understand. I want them to be able, when they see anti-Semitism, oh, red flag. Okay, there is something, somebody's trying to manipulate me into something that I couldn't have done without that. So, yeah, for example, somebody wants me to participate in a genocide. I was never killed. But this thing called anti-Semitism is actually able to do it, to make me do it.
You know, it's interesting. I never thought of it. You just kind of gave me an idea. The idea of treating anti-Semitism as a scam, and almost beginning, not even talking about anti-Semitism, but scams in general. Why do we buy into scams? Like the psychology, why do we, that could be so interesting, yeah.
It's a very interconnected, and usually if you teach people how to avoid scams, it usually also can
I think that's really
vaccinate them against conspiracy theories.
It's really fascinating, and also what's happening now with scams. I don't know if anybody in this room has gotten it, but scams you're getting emails from actually companies that you may be using that are saying you haven't paid your bill. They're literally taking the engaged with. And it's like, you know, this has come from like PayPal, let's say, right?
Mhm.
I don't even have PayPal outside of Maverick. And an email, you know, something about money, call us at this number. And if you call that number, it will be someone claiming to be from PayPal. So it's a fascinating kind
It is very fast. I even have a title for your book. This is the greatest scam, anti-Semitism or something. um, oh, yeah.
First thing I want to do is turn this to the students. Welcome to class. They know what the topic is, but say to them, how do you understand anti-Semitism? What's your definition? So that they become immediately involved in the topic. They're the lecturers. And then I would just put down bullet points on the board to say, okay, somebody said this, somebody said that. And now they're engaged.
Excellent. But you know what else you're doing in that moment? You're doing an assessment. You're assessing what they know. In that moment, you're also identifying gaps, which is great. Did we take it? Yeah?
We're talking about analysis and include existing knowledge and skill. If we have students that we don't have, that didn't have any knowledge or any skill about anti-Semitism, how we can deal about that? To put them in the situation to what?
So if I understood you correctly, you're saying what to do when you have students who have never, by the way, there was a study that conducted, I don't remember the name of the study, that people didn't know that the word anti-Semitism had to do with Jews. They didn't even know that, what?
What do they think it was?
I don't remember, but, okay, so your question is what do you do with students who've never experienced and don't even know? Okay, so I will, if we may, can I address it towards the end? It's a good question, and I have an idea. But maybe somebody else has an idea.
Maybe we should go on.
Yeah, let's go on. All right. All right. Then there's this one, the MPI. It's another, again, there's a lot of curriculum development tools out there. These are frameworks. But here, it's much more modern, and you could see the shift. It's much more, as we say, student-centered. So a lot, in teaching, we talk about teacher-centered, student-centered, okay? And here, you really are, these are three big principles rooted in or anchored in these three principles, and that is demonstration, application, and integration, right? You demonstrate, so these are kind of like the student must demonstrate the knowledge, application, provide students with opportunities to apply the knowledge, and then integrate this knowledge to solve problems. So it comes from the perspective of problem solving. So this is this would be a curriculum for people mostly, I think, in policy, driven by policy, because you are thinking of using the topic of anti-Semitism to drive a certain policy, to enact a certain different law. I'm just going to skip this for time. And then this lovely diagram, which I really love, and I love it because it's messy. Because it is messy. It's not one way. Teaching and creating courses, even if you've it's almost like writing a book. Think of when you wrote your book. You might have written chapter 3 before you wrote chapter 1, right? And you go back and you scaffold in order to prepare your reader for chapter 3. It's really a similar concept. That's why the arrows go back and forth, because that's the experience of creating, and also that's the experience of a student as well. Some student, like the best moments is when a student goes, wow, I remember in week 3 or week 2, you discussed this and now it makes sense. That's really good. That's a really good moment. That means your student is super engaged and can connect ideas. If your students can connect ideas and make links and connections between concepts, that's really good. Okay, so now, what is the difference between learning objectives and learning outcomes? This is how I understand it. Learning objective is very like, what do you want them to know? How do you want them to, and how are you going to get them there? Learning outcomes is, what are they going to do with that knowledge? How is it going to be applied? That's the application in the real world. It's all great and nice that we're sitting and learning about anti-Semitism, but why, kind of, and what, and for what reason? We can discuss this. So, for instance, the learning objective is literally like, what do you want them to know? And also, how will I get them there? That's like more methodology, right? What principles, what methods are you going to use to get them there? And the learning outcome, and I'm going to show you a few examples. Learning outcomes is, okay, they finished your course, they know what they learned, but how are they going to apply that knowledge, the application of that knowledge?
It's also another way, learning objective, they are the units that will lead to the learning.
The modules, yes, the units, the modules, exactly.
And learning outcome becomes entirely of the course, what you take from the course.
Sure, yeah.
When I was designing my license last course, I actually made the final test first, and then started to design the lectures so that the students will be able to answer the questions.
So he applied this backward design through the test, the formative assessment of the test at the very end, and then plotted, mapped out his scope and sequence of the course. Okay, so I'm going to show you a lesson. Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay. As I've talked to you about on lesson plans right now,
What?
I'm working on lesson plans right now, and I'm using ones that have already been written, and I'm modifying them. And what I've seen them do for this section is be very just descriptive. Students will learn how to analyze X primary source for X purpose. Do you recommend that model, or are you thinking more broadly?
I do.
Okay.
I do, because I also started working now with teacher training, and it's very important for teachers to know what am I doing with this lesson? What's the purpose of this lesson? Especially if you're using somebody else's lesson, you can change it, of course, for your own, but I find it much more helpful when I get a lesson from somebody and I need to evaluate it. It's helpful, I think.
So they're more open for the teachers, and then the essential questions portion,
Mhm.
has to be integrated and shown to the students themselves.
Yes.
So the learning objectives and outcomes are for teachers, the essential questions are for students?
Yes, so learning objectives and outcomes are more for teachers, exactly, or for educators, and then the guiding questions are how you're kind of broaching your class. Yes.
Could you just give one example here? Concretely, for example, we just heard a few things about learning objectives of we want to show, I would use the verbs for learning objective, recognize that anti-Semitism is pervasive through place and time. So
Mhm.
that's my learning objective. Am I giving a learning outcome along with that objective? Two sets right in front of my face?
Ideally, yes.
Okay, what would a learning outcome look like?
So you have to think about, well, I'm going to show you a few,
Okay.
but let's think together. Let's say that the learning objective is that anti-Semitism is pervasive and exists across time and space and ideas. What will the learning outcome be for the student? This you have to think with me. Yes.
I would add in order to, so in order to recognize how it exists in their daily lives or in their surrounding communities, something like that.
Okay, so that's already into almost learning objectives. So they will be able to recognize the pervasiveness of anti-Semitism in order to, that's very good, in order to be able to recognize, manifestations or early warning signs of anti-Semitism in their context. And so that becomes now an interesting learning outcome where they're able to apply the knowledge and say, I understand that anti-Semitism, I understand the nexus between, let's say, the far left and Islamism, and I can identify it in the following, understanding certain words that are being used. And let's say they are gonna go, I don't know, to read a New York Times piece, and they're going to read it, and they're going to see that word, and they're going to think, I always say, students have antennas. We all have them. You have antennas, I have them. The point is, are they activated? Are they picking up the signals? And your job as an educator is to activate those antennas, for them to pick up the signals of early warning signs of anti-Semitism. So that could be a good learning outcome for that. Does that help?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so here's a lesson that I developed. Let's take a look. By the way, I'm taking a pedagogical risk right now because I've never done, so I told you I believe in it, so I'm living it right now. I've never done this before. I've never shown my lesson and asked people to identify what my learning objectives were based on this lesson. One of the activities was called Story of a Coin. And it had these kind of three parts to it.
We're looking at learning objectives right now.
Yeah, I'm curious if you
this lesson.
in this lesson. Sorry, I'm like, my back is towards you guys, it's so bad.
I mean, it's built into your post-activity discussion question.
What?
It's built into your post-activity discussion question, the way I'm reading it. Why do you think it's important to about this coin? And I'm actually going to stop there, but I just wanted to add really quickly on our last conversation and on this one, that there's a lot of people talking right now in the field of education and pedagogy about social media and how whatever you teach in the classroom, students are gaining so much of their information from social media. So Hetty, for example, like for what purpose, or in like students might need to go on the New York Times and see where anti-Semitism is, but more likely they're going to pull up their TikTok and like be able to recognize what on there.
Absolutely. So what do you think I wanted my students to know in this lesson?
How is anti-Semitism?
Okay, hint, it had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. This is not a lesson on anti-Semitism. Sorry, I should just say hint. This is not, sorry. Do you want to take new people or? Lou, you just can't. I would love to, yeah.
That there is archaeological evidence not produced by Jews to Jewish indigeneity.
So you think one of my learning objectives there was to show that there's archaeological evidence that Jews are indigenous to Israel?
Yes.
What do you guys think? Okay, okay. Any other learning objective that I have? Yeah.
It's more general, so that they can look at a coin, an antique coin, and understand what is it saying, where does it come from, and so they're now learning how to ask the questions.
So, yeah, I guess. I mean, always when I teach, my learning objective is students. It's Socratic method, inquiry-based, activating their critical thinking by making them ask questions. Yes.
I think you're trying to draw a line from the Jews' sovereign presence historically in ancient times to now.
So you used one of my favorite words, which is sovereignty. When I teach about the conflict, I think sovereignty is very important. It's not that the Jews just live there, they have a sovereign presence. That's something important that I stress, okay? Okay, I mean, that's great. Yay for me. That means my lesson did what it needed to do. But to your, Bonnie, to your point, I have a crazy story. So when I first taught this, one student was like, what am I gonna do with this lesson? What am I gonna do with this coin? Like, she was very dismissive, and not in a rude way, but she was just like, help me understand, how is this coin gonna help me in 2020, this was 2022. In 2022, what am I doing with this coin? Am I gonna go on campus and be like, well, there was the Judea Capta coin once, right? And so what that moment taught me in that classroom is I didn't achieve a learning outcome. So she learned about the archaeology, she learned about the coin, but she didn't understand how does this relate to me today? That's the other thing, how do these things, how do they relate to these students today? Okay, great.
Can I have a question? Not on content, but on the...
Yes.
I'm thinking about what we said about the anti-Semitic education in the academy. They are not teaching them how to think, but what to think. And for me, it means that in the academy we should opt not to try to use an emotional argument, but rather a rational argument. I'm thinking about what you showed before, and I think it's very, very informative, rational. But the question also sparked an emotional connection. I want to perhaps discuss a little bit to hear your thoughts maybe on this issue in an academic perspective, or emotional reaction to rational things like that. Because, I'm Israeli, so perhaps I will have less of this problem, but I'm sure people, would see it and just get up and leave it's a non-starter, I think, for some people from what I hear.
For the audience are mostly non-Jewish students. So the emotional is not a big problem for them.
You think so?
Yeah,
The
I
connection?
think so.
I think it's so important for your to tap into the emotions, and I know it's not what we do in higher education and scholarship, but and that's where the passion, you have to have a passionate person in front of you and connect to them. I mean, I'm not going to give you, I can give you some examples of what I do to really connect with students. Maybe it's radical, but I know it's a very dirty word, advocacy. No. We're doing education. We're not indoctrinating. We're just doing no advocacy. But the students that I work with, they are going to be facing anti-Semitism. They are going to be facing a person who's going to tell them something, and you want them to do something with that knowledge. So one of the accusations against the Jewish people is that we stole land, okay? That we're usurpers. And one day, my class was in front of me, and I came up to a girl, and I was very serious, and I said, may I use you as an example? Wendy, I just saw your mom at 7-Eleven or at Target. I saw your mom, and she shoplifted. Your mom shoplifted, I saw it. And this girl was like, what are you doing? And I was very serious. I said, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass you like this in front of everyone, but I didn't know, you need to know. You need to know that your mom just did something extremely immoral. What do you think this girl said to me?
You're a liar.
You're a liar. She was so angry. She got so angry, but she didn't get defensive. She didn't say, I know my mom, she's never gotten a speeding ticket, she's squeaky clean. She didn't go into any of that. She went and said, my mom would never do that. How dare you?
I'm sorry, is it appropriate to
No, it's not appropriate.
talk about such things?
It's not appropriate. It was, I told you, I believe in pedagogical risks. Now, this was not in a formal classroom. This was in an after-school program.
Yeah, still like these things should be dealt with in privacy.
I hear you all. I understand. It worked out in that moment. I have to tell you, it just worked out for me. I didn't get in trouble, okay? But it was a very passionate moment for this girl because.
What I'm trying to say is, the student then gets into the defensive mode also because she feels embarrassed, she feels the peer pressure. In privacy setting, she might have reacted, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. But in front of others, she has to preserve her face.
Maybe. I don't know. It was an interesting moment for me. But the thing is, first of all, the other thing is with your students, you have to build trust. You have to build a relation. I believe in this. You have to build relationships. So I didn't come in on day 3 and do this. I've been with the student for almost 2 years. But no, Meng, I hear you. I understand. I understand that it's a very radical thing. But it was a very interesting moment. And we use that to discuss ways in which we talk about accusations that are waged against the Jewish people and how we immediately go into the defense because let's say we believe these things. Anyway, I do a lot of Arab-Israeli conflict. All right, yes, sir.
So she did shoplift, or you?
No, nobody shoplifted.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
There's ways of doing it that I
That's
think.
important information.
Oh, sorry, she did not shoplift. No.
But there's ways of accomplishing it without risking that too. One can start off and say, what if I were to start off today and tell you that one of your mothers had shoplifted? Okay, and so you can change the perception of something. When I did research on nicotine addiction, I would start off by saying, if I came in here and told you that 3 plane loads of 747s just crashed sit with that, but it's different than saying 1,000 people die every single day. So I like what you're thinking about. It gets us out of the way of normally thinking about something into a different space, and that opens people up constantly.
Lavi, is that how you pronounce your name?
A bit.
No, but I'm asking your name, Lavi.
Lavi.
Lavi, did that kind of, because you asked about activating emotions. And that was, I understand everyone, I understand that but I'm sharing this with you, I feel like I can in this vulnerable space with you all. I understand that may have been a very radical thing to do. It worked out, it actually worked out very well, and it was very successful. Yes, oh yes.
Can I engage 20 more seconds? I want to show that when I'm teaching, for example, I tend to be on a very friendly and personal level with people outside of the class. For example, I always stay later, I allow people extensions, more than the regulation and so on, because for me, if they see me as a person who is passionate and sympathetic, they would assign me agency. Then they would rely on me as a person who is balanced and cares about them and want to tell them the truth. So this is my way to relate. So maybe I'm getting the agency instead of giving them the critical agency, let's say, which is. So that's how I deal with emotions. I change the story to be focused about me as a teacher, not about the topic. I just think that.
What I'm trying to say is it's very important to have activating those emotions. Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like pedagogically, I understand why people in this room are kind of like confused by the story you shared, but I want to share that I've been one of those students in that classroom. Like, was this at an American Jewish type classroom?
It wasn't a classroom, it was a youth program.
Yeah, so like from youth group to like the Jewish high school I attended, I mean, my female teachers specifically were like my pseudo moms. Like the relationship that you build with the faculty in those spaces or with your youth group advisor, they're incomparable to what I experienced in public school classrooms or other like non-community spaces. So I'm actually seeing your story in a way that like my teachers 100% would have done that, and we all would have understood what they were doing once we got to the lesson part of it. And yeah, I think that context is super important here, because if I tried to do that in a college classroom or in just like a regular like high school, it would not be the same safe space essentially that it probably was for that student.
I would not do this in a college classroom at all. I'm telling you all right now. Okay, so just for the sake of time, I'm moving. I mean, the lesson continued on, and we read Yehuda Halevi's "My Heart is in the East and I am in the Outmost West," and we analyzed that as well. Okay, so you guys are correct. One of my learning outcomes was to learn about the roots of the Jewish people. The other thing is some people didn't talk about this, but I did tie it a lot to Jewish identity and to connection of Israel. And my learning outcome was, so this is for you, Hedy, 1-to-1. So to learn, why did I want them to learn about the roots? So that the students will be able to see themselves in the continuum of Jewish history. Why did I want them to learn? So I wanted them to be able to articulate, in order to articulate about what it means to be a Jew. 3, this was an interesting one. Students will be able to identify anti-Zionist narrative or discourse. That was the other thing that was, these are more in order. So 1 corresponded to 1, 2 corresponded to 2, 3 corresponded to 3. So why did I want them to learn about the Jewish people and their connection to the land of Israel? Yeah, great identity building, but then, like you said, Zahava, because they're on social media, because they're inundated with this, I wanted them to be able to see, could they identify anti-Zionist discourse? Okay, I taught a class on Dostoevsky, his short story, The Ridiculous Man, and I'm only sharing this with you because I think it's really important to have guiding questions when you're building out your syllabus week by week, and your guiding questions have to dovetail with the learning objectives of that week. So we had to learn about the myth of Sisyphus when we learned about that story by Dostoevsky. Okay. So I'm about to teach a class in Tikva online. Have you guys heard of the Tikva Fund, anybody? And it's a book called The Genius of Israel by Dan Senor and Singer. Yeah. So they asked me to teach it. So the other thing is your course descriptions. Got to think about that too. Your course descriptions, could you identify my learning objectives through this course description? Let's see. Another pedagogical risk. What do you think what do you think my course is about? Well, it's about the book, but largely, what are the topics that I'm going to be dealing with? Great exercise. If when you guys are creating a course, give it to someone else and see, hey, Wendy, here's my course. Can you identify my learning objectives? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that you're giving students an opportunity to understand the nature and soul of the country.
Okay.
And how it's, despite what people are told, is actually a very happy, productive, and productive country.
Okay.
To me, it reminds me my course, Religion and Society of the State of Israel. That's, I think that's how the course is titled.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
How can you replicate the success of a country who has been through so much but still demonstrates incredible resilience?
Yeah. That's the other thing is, what can this country teach the world about the challenges? How has it been able to overcome these challenges? So kind of, instead of bemoaning, the lachrymose narrative that you spoke about by Salo Baron, that, lachrymose narrative of Jewish catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe, whilst understanding that it is nestled in this volatile region, how has it emerged so successful? And it's not because there's a protocols of the elders of Zion sitting there. All right, great. So I had guiding questions, and I begin with what are some leading factors for a healthy society? Because these are the larger questions. Yeah, it's about Israel, but like, what makes a healthy society? Is it pluralistic? Is it democratic? Is it free? Because remember, my larger point is to make people see that Israel could be this leader charting the way for the West. So the class is 5 days long, and it's for high school students. And maybe we will spend some time at the end looking at some criticism. That's important. Really always important to do that.
The problem is that the book hasn't aged well in certain areas. For example, electric cars and things like that.
Right.
You
mean in Israel?
In Israel, there's a lack of Hebrew. Sometimes right now, it's just an oversimplification to say that it's a united country at all times.
Oh, that's the other thing. That's the other thing that I want to deal with. In Jewish education, we have this idyllic understanding of Jewish unity. And the truth of the matter is, I don't know if any of you know the Altalena affair between Ben Gurion and Menachem Begin. I'm going to teach that because it's really important for these students to understand that there's this, idealized version of Jews always, we have to be united, united, united. Well, we're not always united. It's important. But again, I understand I work with Jewish students, so these are very Jewishy conversations. So to end, I'm just going to end with what I began. Remember, teach, tell, involve. Teach, tell, involve. What are you going to teach, tell, involve? And then my final thing that I'm going to show you, I'm going to move over there now. Are you picking it up? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Very quickly, because...
Sorry, still on mute. Turn it off mute.
Hello? Yeah, okay. Because kind of heavily about the Arab-Israeli conflict, I want to show you a course that I developed. Yes, a curriculum, excuse me. Oh, gosh, how do I make it? Okay, so I created a class called A Lethal Hatred, and it's for teachers, a teacher's guide on anti-Semitism. And I began with a table of contents. It's on my Substack. You guys can find this on my Substack. So we always began with guiding questions, lesson overview, and learning objectives. I believe in something called a lesson hook. I always begin with a hook. Case studies are really great, by the way, if you're teaching anti-Semitism. And then there's two kind of cool schools of thought. One is, I'm gonna teach it chronologically, and then the other is, I'm actually gonna teach it from today backwards. I've taught it both ways, and I have to tell you, if you teach from today backwards, it's more effective because you get them right away because you're dealing with anti-Semitism now. So I just wanted to show you a little bit. So here were my provide an overview of Jew hatred. Notice I'm not using the word anti-Semitism. Provide an overview of Jew hatred through 3 distinct eras. What is anti-Semitism? Leading accusations waged against the Jews. This is the tropes. This is my and then why Jews? Why are they cast as a villain? And conceptualizing anti-Semitism as a lethal ideology. And then this was my hook. It's a whole lesson that I've developed. More than happy. It's on my Substack. So I'm just going to end here for any questions and discussions. Thank you very much. Do you want me to stand here or?
I'm fine either way. Thank you so much. I just had a question. I have learned that there's a verb table to be used for learning objectives, such as recognize that anti-Semitism pervasive, not just located in the Holocaust, identify, gain knowledge. Okay. When I looked at your objectives and outcomes, you were using those as verbs, but in the learning outcomes, but you weren't using them in objectives. Could you just clarify that for me?
Yeah, because objectives, when I say learning objectives, it's very kind of like, okay, I'm not very good at math, but imagine I was a math teacher. I want them to know Pythagorean theorem. I want them to know about acute triangles. And then the learning outcome would be that it's the application in order to recognize, I don't know why it's, I don't know what, maybe math wasn't a good idea to use. I'm really bad at math, but you're right. When you're talking about learning outcomes, you're using these active verbs like recognize, because you're not. That's why when you say teach, tell, involve, when you're teaching, that's just learning objectives. Like I want them to know X, Y, Z, but what do you want to do? What do you want them to do with that knowledge? That's the point here. That's learning outcome.
Right, and I agree with you. I can't find anything in the literature that brings us up to date, because when you Google learning objectives, you're going to find those active verbs used for learning objectives. So in the medical curriculum world, they're still using active verbs. After this seminar, participants will, 1, identify, 2.
Good. Why is that bad?
Because they don't term it as a learning outcome, it's termed as a learning objective.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't get really stuck on how you call it, as long as it's achieving its goal. That's good. That's another way to thank you. That's another way to think about. After this class, students will be able to 1, 2, 3. No more. I always say no more than 3.
Continuing education I must send that in. And I've been calling it learning objectives only because a lot of folks call it that still. They don't call it an outcome, but
it's more of an outcome. But okay,
yeah,
it's
I
fine.
agree with you. I do. It's just the lingo seems to be still in the objectives, and I can't teach it unless I send it for you.
Just to, if I may piggyback, I like it when you just said the word goals, because, again, in the bureaucratic hell of going through curriculum, and then they change the words, the state of California says 1 year it's objectives, the next year it's outcomes.
what public policy does and what they call budget planning, because you need to define your goals of your programming, and you need to do all of these same elements in order to justify having a budget or bringing it in the next year. And you also have to look at the way you've done things and alternatives. Are there other ways that could be done, and then weigh them to prove that, or to demonstrate the need for this particular method of moving forward. So I just thought it was really, the same kinds of processes can exist in different places, and if you wanted to think of other ways of thinking about it, looking at strategic planning or budget planning for programs or for departments or for anything, it's like, it's just very, very, very similar. That's all.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
I must say that in my own country, I'm trying to somewhat rebel against this bureaucratic language. Teaching goals, teaching objectives, teaching aims, teaching, and then there are exactly these committees which have nothing else to do than to, surgically analyze each and every verb that you use and exactly make the list of verbs which are permissible and not permissible, and it feels very Orwellian sometimes. And
It is.
and then you hear the same people who are sitting in the committees, you hear them actually teaching, and you see that they suck at it. They suck at it. It's usually frontal delivery, it's, kind of lecture. So I'm just, do not get overwhelmed or discouraged by this bureaucratic language, and maybe let us let it go against it a little bit, because it becomes a tool of oppression, as Foucault would say. There's a specific discourse that is being created by people who themselves are not exactly good teachers, but are making the job more difficult for everybody else.
Those who can teach, teach. Those who can't tell you how to put together a curriculum.
Amen. Amen.
Oh, yes.
Thank you for sharing this great experience teaching anti-Semitism and how to teach about anti-Semitism. But as you know, maybe teaching anti-Semitism, teaching about anti-Semitism is a subject or a topic which have socially urgent topic in my view, especially during this crisis, political crisis of but in my view, the way that we should teach about anti-Semitism should be different because we have a lot of variants. Teaching about anti-Semitism in France is not like in the United States, and it will not be in Morocco from where I'm coming. And also, we should take also the variant of students teaching. Charles is not like teaching adolescents. Teaching about teaching during after 7th October. It's not like the teaching before. I think we should take this variance in consideration. Thank you.
Yeah. But I guess I didn't even answer your question, which is when you have non-Jewish students, how do you? So, I still believe, just like Bonnie said, that your first session, when you're getting to know the students, you're also getting to know what they know. And you're asking them a lot of questions. Like, what do you think anti-Semitism means? Who are Jewish people? Have you ever met a Jewish person? So you have to first establish what's the foundation in your classroom, I think. You teach in Morocco?
Yeah.
So your population will be Muslim? You train teachers who are teaching where? In schools?
Teaching in schools, primary schools, and high schools.
And hospitals? High schools, excuse me, high schools, sorry. My suggestion really would be to say that your first session should be, who are the Jews? Who are the Jews?
You wouldn't have another answer. The answer you are also a Semite.
Correct, okay, fine, but Jews, not Semites, who are the Jews?
Moroccan city, without, like, you look on a Moroccan street and you see Jewish influences everywhere.
Super, Dr. Goldman.
I want to dive down to that even a little bit more, because I think, like, I'll be teaching on a college campus, maybe others on a college campus, and the great majority will not be Jewish. Some will have not met Jews down in the South, and yet they will all have opinions, and I'm kind of curious how the different pedagogy will evolve into ways that will be different in complements. I just wonder if we could just hear some other ideas from the group about how they would go about teaching a class that is predominantly non-Jewish on a college
Great.
campus.
About anti-Semitism?
Yes.
Meaning, how would you begin? You're asking, how would you begin?
I've got some learning objectives, but it's going to look different, because if I do a case study on, and 90% of Jewish students would understand exactly what that's about, and so it would be a whole different discussion potentially than perhaps with non-Jews, and I'm trying to think through that a little bit better.
Great. That's a great question. Let's use this as a
For me, when I start with sharing history between Muslims and Jews in Morocco, the cohabitation between Muslims and history, I told them that Judaism also is our culture, is our religion for more than 3,000 years. So they can understand, but still have something that block them because of the situation, because of the propaganda, because of ideologies, and a lot of things.
Okay, very good. So you identified also these blocks that these students have, which are these entrenched beliefs, but you would go into really showing them that, you know, their country, their civilization could not in many ways have been without the Jewish, is what you would do. Okay?
I think she has the mic, and then.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So I just wanted to circle back to Adam's question, because this is my second year at ISGAP, and I did develop a syllabus, and it's for a graduate class who they're mostly not Jewish students, on anti-Semitism, but it's in a college of public health. So I thought if I read the description of the course, that might help, and it's published on ISGAP's website with all the learning objectives and the course outline as well. But it's called The Effective Anti-Semitism in the Context of Community and Societal Health. The course will provide students with a broad understanding of anti-Semitism, its roots, history, the context of current global manifestations. The course will describe anti-Semitism as a social determinant of health in the social and community policy context, its impact on the health of individuals and the community. The course will help future health professionals and leaders understand their responsibility to recognize and respond to upstream factors that contribute to anti-Semitism. So that's a course for predominantly non-Jewish students, graduate students, in a college of public health. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I like some of the framing of that in terms that are accepted terms within that population.
It resonates.
Using some of that language. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. And it's on the website. Thank you.
Two things. One, a recommendation to Dr. Goldstein, and a question for you. So the base of your students, are they mainly Christian? The audience, your audience, are they mainly Christian students or brought up Christian, not necessarily practicing Christian?
Atheist.
Okay, because in terms of those who've been brought up Christian or their parents were Christians, for example, there's that Christian anti-Semitism that might exist in their DNA. And I would recommend, shamelessly, Dr. Patterson's book, Anti-Semitism and Its Metaphysical Origin. Actually, I recommend it to everybody. It's a fantastic book. I think it should be a prerequisite for any anti-Semitic course that is being taught everywhere. So it's called Anti-Semitism and its Metaphysical Origin. So that would be my recommendation for you. But if I may, about my own situation, my course would have to be an online course. I don't teach anywhere, I'm a student. What are your, maybe we can talk also later, but basically for me, for my class, it has to be the importance of the historical, what the relationship between the Assyrians and the Jews and why the Jews came to Mesopotamia. I have to go back that far. And also bring in the Arabization and Islamization of my community and the protocols of Elders of Zion has influence also in there, and also obviously the current indoctrination. So I need to design this from different perspectives: historical, religious, and modern times, right? So do you have any advice on a curriculum that will be an online course and international?
How does online change the dynamic?
Are you asking me how does online change? Is that what you're saying?
What is your advice in terms of designing an online course versus an in-person course? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of courses now are online, and it's kind of unfortunate because I actually believe that it's not as great. But this is the world we live in, and we do have a lot of online classes. This is probably not going to be the most best advice, but I would also limit the number of participants. When you have so many people, you also have to have rules. Cameras have to be on. I believe in that. Cameras have to be on. People have to be completely engaged. People have to be accountable for themselves, right? And again, you're not lecturing at them, you're talking with them, you're involving them in discussion. So I would limit, personally, I would limit enrollment. I would set guide rules, rules such as cameras have to be on, and assignments. So a lot of people, there's this idea of asynchronous education. I'm not a big proponent of it, but also using, a lot of people who teach in the online space, they use like the smart boards for students to be able to comment. I don't find that helpful personally. I've been in a classroom where I'm online and I have to, one of my my grade depends on participation. Well, I'm just contradicting myself because you see that was, the teacher put responsibility on me, but my grade depended on participation. And one of the ways that I had to participate is I had to comment on students' what they put on posts. And then I started using it in my own classroom because I also do teaching online as well. And I found that people just say vapid things, like they don't really engage with one another. And so I actually don't use it anymore. I don't ask students to post on one another's comments. So there are different tools. There's breakout. Some people have toyed with breakout. You know how you can do on Zoom breakout rooms. But again, really, really important. I would not make it a big class. I would limit it 12. I know it's not even a big number, but 12, no more for online. Because you also have to think about the classroom as also the space. How many? It's not even 12. How many squares can fit? How many? 49? Wow, okay. Well, I would limit. So we could talk more about that, but yeah. It's not that it could be done, and I think it could be done very effectively, but you know, you have to think of the classroom as in a completely different way.
I like to address a dilemma. So basically, the biggest dilemma of my teaching in the past 15 years, and I think many people have the same when teaching, when talking about learning outcomes, learning objectives. The learning outcome of classical anti-Semitism is something like the students will be able to more effectively identify anti-Semitic speech patterns or something like that. However, what can happen will be that the students will be more effective at hating Jews. Because, and why I'm asking it, I'm dealing with audiences which are non-Jewish, and many of which, before my class, have never actually seen some of the anti-Semitic tropes. So my class is for the first time when they actually learn the connection between Jews and blood.
Jews and what?
Jews and blood, for example.
Jews and blood.
And now this is a dilemma. Should I be even telling them about it? And how to tell them without actually teaching them that this is, that the Jews, they are connected with blood, things like that. And why I'm raising this, I have taught in many audiences. Some of them were very, very friendly, some of them were very unfriendly. One of the most unfriendly audience that I have had was when I was asked to teach in Slovakia for high-ranking officers of Slovak police and prison service. These were chaplains of the Slovak police and prison service, and I was asked to deliver a lecture on conspiracy narratives. After I finished the lecture, it turned out in the Q&A that about 60% of my audience believes in conspiracy narratives. So I'm raising this because this is a serious question, but I'm raising it if you perhaps want to approach me after that. How to teach anti-Semitism without teaching anti-Semitism?
Yeah, would you respond to that? I only put you on the spot because you study how people make decisions. If I may, I don't mean to be the teacher, but.
No, this is great. He would like Elle to address that question because she has done work in trying to understand how people form their decisions and opinions.
I think, kind of framing it in a bigger way, there's this question about how exposure to certain stimulus material, such as stereotypes, impacts our attitudes and behaviors, right? And so I think, kind of zooming out, the larger question is, how do you expose, if I can reframe it, it's how do you expose people to stereotypes that they may not have been aware of without having them internalize them as their own belief system, right? Is that what we're...
Exactly. You are native speaker, I am not, so you choose much more effective words.
And it is a great question, and we probably don't have time for a really big discussion about it, but I would encourage, there's a lot of literature around how stereotypes do and do not impact our attitudes, and I'm sure we can all probably think of examples from our own lives that we've seen certain stereotypes and found them really horribly offensive, and we've seen things that were like, oh yeah, that kind of fits in with my worldview. And part of that is about when we come with our own belief systems and things fit in with them, they're much more easily adopted because we internalize them because they already have a pre-existing alignment with our belief systems, versus things that are incongruent with our belief systems, and there's dissonance, and then we wrestle with the dissonance about why is that incongruent. And so I think there's a bigger question of knowing your audience, understanding where they come from, maybe doing some pre-work with them around understanding what is going to be congruent and not, but also understanding the impact.
May I turn the question back on all of you? Let's say, just Isaac, I'm using your last name. May I? Let's say there are people in this world known as the Amanovs, the Amanov people, and we're going to go listen to Amanoticism, about the hatred of the Amanovs. I'm just asking you all, are you going to sit and internalize these stereotypes? Think of yourself as the student. I'm just wondering, you're going to go listen to a talk about the bigotry of the Amanov people and how people are perceived. Are you going to internalize those stereotypes?
I've been hearing about them since I was 3 years old. Sure. That's what my grandparents think, and my neighbors and my uncles.
So why did you enroll in this class then?
Maybe even to consolidate my views. This is my own family has been telling me since I'm 2.
Okay, so that's great. So that's one student. But then there are students who don't even know who Jews. He was talking about this then Wendy.
Go ahead, Lou.
Specifically on this. I will always try to relate it to the class. So, for example, some people may have negative stereotypes about people from San Francisco. And so I'll introduce with how our beautiful city is viewed by many people around the country, most of which is parody of, some strung out acid head somewhere in Haight-Ashbury, and then introduce it that way through something that works through analogy. And it depends on the classroom, but to then be able to talk about things. So for example, very close to this is when I teach ethnic politics, there are certain very predominant stereotypes about African American women. Jezebel, Sapphire, Mammy, things like that. And I've had some say, well, this is sort of offensive. I'm like, well, yes, that's what stereotypes are, but they were then able to plug it out and pull it and see it in current popular culture. I also, when I do conspiracy theory, first a quick plug for Will Eisner's The Plot, a graphic novel that explains the whole history brilliantly, and it's a comic book, so they read it. Is explain that conspiracy, what they are, which are theories of power by people who feel powerless. And once you do that, and I always start with the reptilians anyways, you can get to that, then ask, well, why would this people be seen as a place to project feelings of powerlessness?
Good. Last question, Wendy.
What I wanted to say speaks to both what Yael was saying and what he was saying, and that is, if people are receptive to certain things, that may be because they don't have a preconception. If they don't, the way I think of it is a cup. You have a cup of knowledge, either it's empty or it's going to be filled, and it's going to be filled by whatever comes there first. And so if their first encounter is what he is teaching about anti-Semitic tropes that are out there, then I think what he needs to do to counter it is to describe personal experiences that he has had with people that are the opposite of the trope. Because this way you're countering and not just filling that cup with the wrong stuff.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you, everyone. So it's important conversation.
About every 5 minutes, I want to comment or a question. But what blew me away was your